All right, so we're going to talk about the formation of the solar system and ancient astronomy and ancient religion and belief systems and how they understood how the universe, I mean, not the universe, the solar system was created. I need to sit up straight for y'all. All right, so there's the Babylonian tablets of 7 tablets of creation. In each tablet, there of 7, there's a divine number, just like there's the 7 days of God's creations. Those each tablet kind of mimics and mirrors. I wouldn't say mimics. The 7 days of creation in Christianity mimics and mirrors the Sumerian and Babylonian tales of creation story, the tablets of creation. So I'm not going to read those tablets word for word because some of them, those tablets, are fragmented, and there's portions of those tablets that are we can't read. So portions of those tablets we are ignorant to. So I'm not going to try to do that and read everything and explain it. So I'm just going to explain to you what people have kind of pieced together. Um, but we're not going to actually talk too much about the exact chronological. I'm just going to do a basic summed up story. Okay, so just like in the beginning of Christianity, there was like the earth was void and without form, and it was dark, and God created this. But it gets in a little. Okay, so there's these. So they called their planets certain things, and they had 12 planets. They had the 9 planets that we think of, Mercury through Pluto. Yes, they had noticed Pluto even back in the 1930s is when we officially discovered it through a telescope, human beings, and officially recorded it. But there's ancient civilizations that have recordings of Pluto, and we're about to discover some truly interesting things about this. So 12 planets or 12 celestial bodies that they followed. So the 9 main planets that we grew up as most of us grew up knowing. Now kids these days don't recognize Pluto as the 9th planet, but we're gonna say that is the 9th planet. Then you have the sun and the moon, which would be 10 and 11, and you're wondering where this 12th planet, this 12th celestial body is, and you've heard me possibly make this reference in a previous video, talking about Nibiru. The Sumerians called him Nibiru, that planet Nibiru, and the Babylonians called it Marduk, Marduk. Now, Marduk was also the name of the chief god in the Babylonian tales, and we're not going to get too much because it's actually a weird story to get into about the genealogy and the heritage of the gods, because they transfer throughout civilizations. Like the son of one god ends up being usurping like all the gods, and then like through different civilizations these gods switch powers, and like not switch powers, but they it's kind of like they battle and take over as chief god, like normal people would battle and have struggles for power. So in the beginning, let's just talk about the names. Okay, so they called the sun Apsu. Mercury was Mumu. Venus was Lahamu. Uh, the Earth was called Ki, but it was also called Tiamat. So Ki and Tiamat, remember that. And then our moon was called Kingu, Kingu. Mars was Lahamu. So there's no, sorry. Venus was Lahamu. Mars was Lamu. Then the asteroid belt was called the Hammered Bracelet. That's what it translated to. Jupiter was Kishar. Saturn was Anshar. Um, Uranus was called Anu. And I actually have them at Neptune was called Ea, E-A, and Pluto was called Gaga. And then, so we have those 12 bodies plus the celestial bracelet, the hammered out bracelet, or the hammered bracelet, or the asteroid belt. So let's talk about Earth specifically. Now the Sumerians believe that that last planet, Nibiru or Marduk, depending on which civilization you're going through, was the planet that their gods came from. And in the previous video, I talked about the elliptical pattern and the orbital pattern, the Shar. That was in the Divine Numerology video. And it talks about the Shar being the orbital pattern or the orbital period of how long it takes Nibiru to pass around an orbit around the sun. But it has a long, elongated this orbit. So there's a perigee. I just said a perigee. There's a perigee, which is like the shortest part right when it wraps around a gravitational body like the sun. And the perigee it'll kind of like slingshot. It'll like tighten, slow it down. And when it wraps around the sun, it'll go faster and slingshot. And it goes to apogee or the apogee. The apogee is the longest, furthest part away from the sun. So the perigee or the perigee is the closest point of the elliptical of that sun. I'll show you a diagram later after I get done explaining all this. And so they have that. So it takes 3,600 years for that planet, that is what they said, to orbit around the solar system. But since it kind of comes in really close, it intersects with a lot of the orbits of the planets. So they believe that Nibiru, as it was coming from the outer part of the solar system, was passing all these planets. Now, Pluto or Gaga was not a planet originally, and it tells you how it became a planet in its own celestial body. And it's actually going to make, all this is going to make a lot of sense, and it's going to blow your mind, because how are people from 6,000 years ago, how are they able to understand this? How are they supposed to come up with such beautiful and intricate theories of how the solar system was created? So Nibiru or Marduk was coming, and then it passed Neptune or Ea, then it passed Uranus or Anu, then it passed, and as it was coming through Anshar, which was Saturn, Anshar had an emissary or a moon called Gaga, and then the moon went in great battle with Nibiru, meaning that it was thrown out of its gravitational well, so to say. I call it a well. Its orbit. It was thrown out of its orbit around Saturn, and then it became its own god, so to say, or its own body. It was no longer part of Anshar. So Gaga or Pluto was rocketed out to the outer edges of the solar system and became the 9th planet, its own body, its own celestial body. And then they recognized that as its own celestial body. So that's how the Sumerians believe, and the Babylonians and all those people in Mesopotamia believed, that Pluto became a planet. It actually started out as Saturn's moon, and now Nibiru was a huge, in their theology, it was a huge planet, very huge, like made Jupiter look small. So it continues past, and then it goes to past Jupiter, and it starts to intersect. Now, originally, how they said the solar system started out was, it was Mercury, Venus, Mars, Earth, Jupiter. So Mars and Earth were in different spots. And you can kind of see maybe an idea where we're going to go with this, and how Earth became from the 4th planet from the sun to the third planet from the sun. So it gets closer and closer and closer, and then it starts doing its perigee or perigee, and it's where it's closest to the sun, and it's starting to wrap around and go back to the outer part. So it's wrapping around the sun, and as it's doing that, it's coming in close proximity to Tiamat, or Earth 1, or Earth version 1. So and it's going right in between Tiamat and Lamu, or Mars. So between Earth and Mars. And then one of the moons of Nibiru struck Earth, and it cleaved it in half. And one half of it spun around into the third position and reformed and coalesced into planet Earth, or Ki is what they call it. So Tiamat was the Earth when it was in the fourth position from the sun, and Ki is now, would be today, third position. So half of that spun off, and then it survived, and then cooled down and did its things over many, many long years, and became its own planet again. But the other half became the hammered bracelet, the asteroid belt. So now if this is kind of like creeping you out, because now there's these theories that planet X might be true, which could be Nibiru, and it's very big, but we can't see it if it is, because it's so far out there that not enough light is shining on it for us to detect it yet. But there are people that, like scientists and astronomers, that have claimed that they have seen traces of it, but they can't find it again to prove it. But they know that there's something very large out at the edge of our solar system, which could make all this somewhat true. So it talks about Pluto, or Gaga, becoming its own planet, which is very significant. And it talks about the creation of Earth, and a very good explanation of where the asteroid belt came from. And it also explains to us why, unlike other terrestrial planets, there's gas planets and terrestrial planets. We are a terrestrial planet, meaning we have land and rock, and it's very rocky. It's not, and then gas planets are very gassy. So terrestrial planets, even if they have water, if every physics engine on a computer that replicates any type of mass of celestial body that's terrestrial and it has water, that water is going to terraform or form around that planet in an even manner. And it's going to be kind of evenly distributed. You're going to have like spots of lakes and spots of water, land all over the place. It's going to be kind of like Pangea on a grand scale. But if you look at our globe, this will help strengthen that their belief could be a very viable theory, because if our Earth was cleaved in half by a moon, and half of it became a asteroid belt, do you think that possibly, if you look at the Pacific Ocean, one whole side of the Earth is just nothing but water? There is like hardly, it's just vast oceans. And the other hemisphere of the Earth, not hemisphere, but the other half, I guess, if you're dividing the hemispheres up a little bit differently than how we do on our maps and our globes today, if we were to change that hemisphere by 90 degrees, and the east and west hemisphere are now just shifted over, one hemisphere will be all water. And you can look at that on Google Earth, you can look at that in the globe, however you want, you'll see that. And that would make perfect sense why our Earth is not perfectly terraformed to rest of the terrestrial bodies, that like it should suggest, like how we should have formed. If we were formed naturally, we wouldn't have that big, massive expanse of ocean. We'd have some bigger bodies of land somewhere. And the asteroid belt is very similar in content with minerals and metals and alloys and stuff like that on those that mimic Earth, and just like the moon. So like the moon is very similar to Earth, and we can kind of guess that the moon came from Earth just the same way as the asteroid belts. And this all makes sense. Like this is a lot of, but they talk about it like these things are having battles. But like you have to look at a lot of this is very like metaphorical and symbolic, because if try to explain, like I always try to explain, try to learn ancient like Anglo-Saxon English from like pre Germanic influence, like we're talking about Anglo language before the British people, the British Isles had any influence from any other nation. Very in the early stages before water travel, when they had their own language without any Roman or Latin or Germanic or Gaelic tongues interfering with them. So it's like uh, anyway, so try to explain, if you would know that language, and try to explain what an airplane is in an old dialect that had no terminology for anything. You'd come up with some weird thing like a flying machine, because you don't have like the words like airplane. You can't use the word airplane. You can't use any modern thing. So like if you're an ancient person trying to describe an airplane or a spacecraft, you're going to use the term bird or an eagle or a dragon or something like that, because there is no word for spaceship or no word for aircraft. This is like, and so you kind of see that same concept. So if you're an early human being told this by somebody of how the universe or the solar system was created, what terms are you going to use to try to explain that for future generations, if you got that from a god or you got that from a another higher intelligent being teaching early humans these things about the solar system? They'd explain it to those early human beings in a language that they understood. Like, oh, they're not going to say, well, a big old planet came by and destroyed another planet. There is no word for planet. So they gave names to these things and they characterized them and they anthropomorphized them. Anthropomorphized means they gave them, kind of like the zodiacs are anthropomorphized. They are given living bodies or representations or symbols. So look at like those stories and ancient fables of gods as anthropomorphications of the early solar system. Like Jupiter from the Roman religions would be representing the planet. And that so they're coming up with these tales that kind of explain a concept that they don't fully understand. So to them, they over the years, people start thinking that this is real and these are real beings, but somebody had to tell them that this all happened. They can't observe this over billions and millions of years, especially if they're not around, especially if they're not around on that planet, if it's getting hit and cut in half, and that's catastrophic. That'd kill everything on that planet. So clearly we weren't there for that. But that is something that is a very good theory of how Earth and how the solar system, and that's too coincidental or too astonishing for them to come up by themselves at that early stage. So if we humans nowadays, modern humans, haven't physically discovered Pluto until the early 1930s with the highest powered telescope at that time. And it was a farmer, I think. A farmer, amateur astronomer, discovered. I believe he was a farmer. I'll have to look into it. I can't remember who it was, but I'm pretty sure he was a farmer and he had an amateur telescope and he discovered Pluto with a telescope in 1932. So how do these people have good concepts of how Pluto and Earth and all that formed if they weren't around for it and they didn't have telescopes and stuff like that, and they didn't understand how these celestial bodies acted or even what outer space was? They just called everything heaven. Everything up there is heaven, and these things floating around are gods or beings, or and so you kind of have to stop thinking of the ancient world as a modern way of thinking. You have to think of primitive language, how you're going to explain complex things with a primitive language without technology being a thing. You know, you don't have uses of words like we do now, and we don't have new words and scientific words like, you're not like back in the ancient times, even trying to explain an antibiotic. People didn't know what antibiotics were. They didn't know what viruses were. They didn't know what bacteria were. They believed it was just some evil spell. You know, like, oh, an evil spell, evilness has fallen upon us, our community, and they didn't know what that was. So how do you explain even something as simple as a virus? You know, there was no medical research into the thing where they're digging up bodies and exhuming bodies and cutting them open and checking blood cells, but they knew of stuff like this. So you just got to think, how would a primitive person explain things? And now I'm going to show you some diagrams. So here is kind of what this is. Marduk is Nibiru, but this is kind of like how the early solar system, what they call Apsu, Mumu, Lahamu. The moon was called Kingu. Earth, after it was struck, was called Ki. Tiamat was right here somewhere. And then you can see how it's going in a pattern against the rest of, see, all the orbital patterns are going here. So it actually come in really close and swoop. I'm going to find another diagram somewhere in here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Perigee and the apogee. When it was close and how it slingshots, and if you guys are into astronomy and know this stuff, you might already kind of know about perigee and apogee and what I'm talking about with the elliptical and the ecliptic of the Earth and Moon. I should just stop flipping one by one, shouldn't I? I should actually flip through this book. Alright. I should have remembered what page it was on. I'm really sorry for this, guys. I should have had this pre-planned out. And now I can't find the page again. Should have put a bookmark. And I'm not going to change it because I'm already 20 minutes into this video. Shit. Now we can't find it, guys. This is embarrassing. Anyways, I don't really have much to talk about right now except for, you know, just nonsense while I flip through this. Oh! It was actually somewhat close by, maybe. That wasn't the diagram I was looking for. It's not as clear. Not plain and cut. So yeah, anyways, but think about that. I'm sorry I can't find it. Maybe actually I'll take pictures of these and then put them in the comments. I'm going to take pictures of these and put them in the comments. So you can kind of revert back to them as you're watching this. I'm going to let you guys go. I'm going to maybe make a part 2 because I was very ill prepared. Every video I make is very last minute, very on like a whim. It's just on a whim, like, oh, I want to talk about this, and I just do it. I don't plan anything, so that's why sometimes I have to like run and grab a book or look for something because it's just spur of the moment. So I apologize for that. Just off the top of the head knowledge. Yeah, I'll talk to you guys in a little bit.